Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
What you got there? Can you hold it up so I can see it a little better?
Yeah.
Oh, that's your man, JD.
And notice the headline, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
There's this ad for sandals. See, that's not the thing. Vance. Vance made Dem friends on rail safety. Democrat friends on rail safety.
I was so
East
right about
Palestine rail safety.
Yes, I was so right about JD Vance. He's now getting strange new respect for cooperating with Democrats, including Sherrod Brown, your hero, on rail safety. They've introduced a bill. It's probably going to pass. All hail JD Vance. He's a good guy.
Can I be pardoned for not responding to that prompt?
You can do whatever you want. It's a good news week, Bob, for Mickey. The second thing is Ron DeSantis has had two positive developments, one negative development, which he's falling behind in the polls. But the positive developments are he has started to cauterize himself on the Social Security issue. He said, we're obviously not going to mess with Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
That seems pretty clear. I mean, all the Oppo people are going to drag up his old votes. But he's allowed to change his mind on Social Security, and he's allowed to bow to political reality and not screw around with Social Security if nobody wants to do it. The second thing is, as you know, I was tearing my hair out figuring out how he could counter.
That's been a growing challenge through your life.
I've been successful.
There's still some there. There's still some to tear out.
I've been successful.
Yeah,
tearing my hair out. So progress has been made, but how DeSantis could counter Biden's industrial policy populism, bringing semiconductors to America, et cetera, and Biden has given him a gift on a silver platter because he's attaching all sorts of restrictions to his semiconductor aid that are extraneous to the basic purpose of building semiconductor plants. They now have to provide adequate daycare, not just for the people who work there, for the people who build the plant. And Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal, a very smart guy, has a good column pointing out that industrial policy succeeds when it's narrowly focused on doing what it's supposed to do, not when Democrats lard on all sorts of things like adding provisions that failed in the Build Back Better plan.
You know what, Mickey? First of all, I've just about gotten over that cauterized himself imagery, which
cauterized the issue.
Yeah, or whatever. But anyway, what you said is cauterized himself on Social Security, and I don't know. So whatever you said for the next 5 minutes, it's a blur. I was just I'm trying to get that image.
I don't apologize for using vivid imagery, Bob.
It was vivid. It was all too vivid.
Why we make the big bucks.
Secondly, quickly before we get back to industrial policy, on the kind of quasi-Bob vindication front, I told you I thought what Trump was doing. He goes to East Palestine while Biden's in Ukraine, or roughly when Biden's in Ukraine, was something he could get some traction on. Well, first of all, did you see the kind of ad he cut about Biden in Ukraine?
No,
it was kind of disturbingly effective. It wasn't an ad per se, but it was taped, produced. It's him talking to the camera. And I can imagine that there's a constituency that'll eat that up. The other thing is,
what did he say?
Well, the usual shit. Biden is spending all your money on Ukraine. I don't remember the details. The point is he's making a big deal of this. And I don't mean he cut an East Palestine ad, although I still think we'll see one eventually. But the other thing is, on the DMZ podcast, Matt Lewis seemed to think that the East Palestine thing was pretty big. I mean, he concedes it has started to fade, but he thinks it's a powerful thing. I mean, first of all, didn't help Buttigieg any, but that's a different matter. I don't know. I think Trump, I guess the disturbing thing about that kind of quasi ad I saw of Trump's is he looked like he hasn't lost it,
Did the ad mention East Palestine? Did it say, Biden is spending money on Ukraine instead of on Ohio?
It's all a blur. I don't know, because social media, it's all coming at you. But
I think you're right about it working for him, because I was racking my brains trying to figure out why he had risen in the polls, and he in a head-to-head in it with DeSantis, he gained ground over the past month over the same poll taken a month ago. So that's some evidence. And I figured, what the hell was he doing in this past month to boost him? And that's probably it. Apparently, he also was less bombastic, and he was sort of down to earth in his visits to Palestine and to a McDonald's, and he didn't have these big rallies where he just pontificated about how he really won the election.
Mm-hmm.
So he sort of dropped the election denial thing. I think that's another big part of his improvement.
Yeah.
So that would be a big deal if he drops election denial.
Now, on industrial policy, I'm not here to defend everything Joe Biden does, but I would say there's an obscure fact about these chip plants that may add a little weight to the argument that daycare is not a terrible idea. I mean, it turns out that at least in Asia, where a lot of chip plants are, women are particularly good at doing the work that gets done in chip factories. There's a lot of, I guess, kind of fine-grained manual stuff. And there's a lot of women who work in those plants. In America, there's a lot of women who don't have husbands and may not be able to afford daycare. So it's not impossible that this feature will increase like the hiring pool for these plants.
Right, but why? But why isn't it in the interest of every company that starts a plant then to start a daycare center? You don't need the government to require it. Each firm will capture virtually 100% of the benefits of having a child care plan.
Well, Mickey, why are they getting a subsidy in the first place? But what this basically does is slightly increase the subsidy. Are you against the subsidy or for it? And if you're for it, how do you know that exactly what it was before they threw in the daycare is the right level of subsidy?
They're not. The daycare isn't a subsidy; it's a cost.
No, it is a subsidy. If, as you said, the alternative is the company paying for it, a subsidy is exactly what it is.
No, they gave the company $100 million, and they could either say, you will build chips with this $100 million, or you will build chips and provide daycare. The government isn't paying for the daycare; the company's paying for that out of the subsidy. Doesn't get any extra subsidy. So why would the government require it to do something it ordinarily wouldn't do? The company is being very rational.
Okay, so in effect,
saw this. I recently saw a film, American Factory. It's actually done by the Obamas. It's on Netflix. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a glass factory in a Chinese company sets up a glass factory in Ohio. And it contrasts how efficient the plant is in China with how slow the workers are in Ohio. So that's part of it. So the companies are being quite rational to offshore the production, and you're giving them a subsidy because you want them to bring it back here.
I mean, you're right. I was wrong about that. But I guess now my question is just, how do you know that? So actually, in a certain sense, the subsidy is slightly less than it was. Right. If they're demanding companies pay for this. But how do you know that's not the right level? I just kind of mean, like, once you're in subsidy land, it's a pretty blunt instrument. Right. But there are worse things. I'm just saying there are much worse things you could require a company that makes a chip. It would make a lot less sense if this was like for construction workers. And I take your point that it also is for the construction workers during the construction of the plant.
There are other requirements too. Some of them are actually written into the law. They can't use the money for stock buybacks, and very controversial issue. Warren Buffett's letter is devoted in part to defending stock buybacks. Why shouldn't a company return the money to the shareholders when it doesn't see a means of investing it wisely in itself? Why do they have to build empires in their own firms? So that that's controversial. It basically requires a union wage. Does it actually require a union? I don't know, but that's like the government's one step away from requiring a union. Another takeaway from this film, American Factory, is unions can really fuck things up. In the end, the firm becomes profitable by doing all sorts of things that a union would never allow. Like, at some point the government meddles so much that it becomes very counterproductive. And Greg Ebb goes into a long list of attempts at industrial policy where the firms have just said, "Fuck you, we're not taking your money. You put on too many strings." There's a Boeing. Boeing once did that. I think with the COVID, with the Obama bailout, the banks got out from under it as quickly as they could. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you really want to subsidize something, at some point you have to get takers. And there are other countries around the globe that are also subsidizing their semiconductor plants. There's no reason why they all have to come here.
I'm not.
Okay.
You have nobody to persuade here. I'm not defending the overall thing. I made a very minor point that there are a lot of apparently women who wind up working at these factories. No. We do have a situation where not having childcare could be a problem, and that's it.
Right. Anyway, I can DeSantis latch onto this and make it an issue? I don't know. It seems maybe second order. If they were requiring equity or requiring proportional, hiring of different ethnicities, he could easily make an issue of it. But I don't think they've done that yet.
No, I mean, who's going to complain about this? Old school Republicans are going to complain about it. The ones who didn't vote for Trump, the ones he's not competing with Trump for are the ones who complain about stuff like this. Not the workers.
DeSantis could be an old Republican or a new Republican.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, I mean, speaking of, well, I was going to say speaking of China, but I guess I won't. I mean, I could do my complaint about Antony Blinken. Let me do a little complaint about Antony Blinken.
Sure.
As of last week, he was making this huge fuss that China might arm Russia, and he didn't want them to, and he was doing it in this weird way of going around and continuing to say it publicly. Now, standard reckoning is that runs the risk of making China less likely to do what you want, because it'll look like they're caving to your demands once you make the demand publicly. And I mean, he made them and made them and made them everywhere. And then, like yesterday or something, they levied a whole bunch of new sanctions on China for some kind of trade with Iran that may be connected to Iran's military, because Iran is, selling drones to Russia or something. And it just reminds me that, the Biden administration foreign policy really has one of the hallmarks of neoconservatism: all sticks, no carrots. And it's just, I mean, good luck. I think there are a lot of reasons China is not going to probably send weapons to Russia, so it'll probably work out fine. But it's
Why?
What?
Why would they not do that?
Well, I think, and look, I mean, it can make sense to make threats publicly, because the way it can make sense is if you worry that people will doubt your credibility. The people you're making the threats to will doubt your credibility.
Right.
Well, once you say in public that there will be hell to pay if they defy your will, that makes this threat more credible, because you'll lose face if you don't follow through on the threat. Right. So there are reasons you could do it. Maybe that's what's going on. I mean, I always worry with the Biden administration that it's actually much more about domestic consumption of the message, and that can get in the way of getting your work done on foreign policy. In fact, there was another example, like Blinken at some meeting, I guess G20 or something, just spoke on the sidelines for 10 minutes with his counterpart from Russia. And first of all, why only 10 minutes? I mean, what would it hurt to actually have an extended conversation? But anyway.
Well, maybe Lavrov didn't want to have an extended conversation.
Maybe, but he was willing to do 10 minutes. Anyway, then Blinken emerges and says, here's what I did in the 10 minutes. I urged them to rethink their suspension of the nuclear arms treaty. Oh, yeah, that'll happen. That'll happen. And I also told them they need to withdraw from Ukraine. It was shit like that. It was just crazy shit. Like, is this really what you spent your time talking about?
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know why they have to do all this stuff for public consumption.
It's
they're going to be judged. They're going to be judged by the results.
Yeah.
by election day.
And then the hilarious thing is whoever this vacuous NPR correspondent was who was covering this says, after reporting all this, says, Secretary of State Blinken wanted to show that the lines of communication are still open. He's keeping the lines of communication open. Yeah, so he can make a bunch of demands that there's no way they're going to comply with.
Oh, Lavrov seems smart enough to know that that's all for show, and we don't know what he really said. And presumably he can offer carrots in private, right?
He could, but if
we went easy on the balloon. We didn't make a fuss about the balloon.
We only sanctioned like 8 Chinese companies that may or may not be balloon related before we even recovered the fucking balloon. Shot down a bunch of things that turned out not to be Chinese balloons, and canceled a visit, and so on.
While we're on China, there are 2 Chinese related bits of news. The most important of which is Nick Eberstadt has a piece in the Post about how the Chinese birth rate is plummeting. And it's really striking. It's not just like it went down 10%. It went down 50% in 6 years.
Yeah.
It cut in half, and it's still going down. So why does that happen? I mean, Eberstadt says this corresponds to Xi's rule, and it's basically a vote of no confidence in Xi. People are depressed. They don't like the future they have. But of course, declining birth rates all around the world are a product of abundance and success and prosperity. So I don't quite know why you could immediately leap to the conclusion it's because they're depressed as opposed to because they feel rich. But anyway, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And the second thing, which is not such a big deal except to me, is that Semaphore, my favorite publication, has cut some sort of deal with some Chinese think tank or commission they've put together, which allegedly, according to Daily Caller, is filled with soft on China experts. But I have no idea who's the soft on China expert. So I would be loath to condemn Semaphore without really knowing the truth there.
Well, then let me do that. I mentioned last week, although I think it was mainly in the Parrot room, that they hired as their like chief national security guy who does their national security letter, this somewhat disgraced Wall Street Journal reporter who was fired by the Journal because he was in doing something that wasn't appropriate with some Iranian exile, rich guy, and they found somebody exposed the emails and so on. And he's hardcore anti-Iran, as I told you in the Parrot room last week. In fact, he spent his interim between getting fired and getting hired by Ben Smith, working at a think tank that at the Washington Institute, which is not pro-Iran, let's just say, so there's that, but the bigger news on Iran is that was segue. That was cheap shot segue.
Okay.
Now what we're segueing to, I mean, first of all, Israel's a mess, as you may have.
Wait, we were transferring to Iran. We're leaving Semaphore behind.
Well, I'm just saying Semaphore hired a hardcore I mean, his coverage at the Journal had been noted for its consistent anti-Iran tone.
I was looking forward to you condemning Semaphore for hiring a bunch of pro-China hacks, but you don't know that for sure.
I do not know that for sure. And I would be less opposed to that because a strong pro-China bias in American discourse is not exactly something that exists and is needed correction, right? I mean, it's like we're heading into a Cold War. It doesn't hurt to have one publication that's not cheering us on, if that's what Semaphore turns out.
Right now, the conventional wisdom is that everybody hates China and it's the new bipartisan consensus.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So it's not like
under Iran.
It's not like having, some minor force countervailing that is a tragedy. So Iran, I had been thinking, when you look at everything that is afflicting Israel at the moment. So, okay, Bibi Netanyahu, who has this weird coalition with these very extremist right-wing elements, they're trying to pass legislation that would rein in the judiciary. And the judiciary, I mean, he seems to be doing it largely to keep himself out of jail because he's under indictment. I don't know if the trial is going on. There's that. But also the judiciary has often been a check on harsh policies toward the Palestinians. He'd like to be free of that. And some of the nut jobs in his coalition would equally likely to be free of that. You know, the guy who's director, Minister of National Security, which I think is like Minister of the Interior, I think like federal police and stuff. Anyway, he's very relevant to the occupation of the West Bank. And until he got into politics and he realized this would be ill-advised, he had a portrait in his living room of Baruch Goldstein. Is that his name? Does that name ring a bell?
The guy who killed Rabin?
No, the guy who killed a dozen or 2 dozen Palestinians while they were worshiping with a machine gun. Okay, the current Minister of National Security in Israel had a portrait of this guy in his living room. And there's another guy who's finance minister who's equally nutty, who just this week said that there was a Palestinian town that should, quote, be wiped out. Now, this was after settlers tried to wipe it out. They set like 30 houses on fire and 100 cars on fire or something. And I think one Palestinian died. And he basically said, you know, settlers shouldn't do this. The government should do it. I mean, that's really like basically the idea. Okay, so you got this extreme coalition. The West Bank is like it's really bad news. There's a cycle of violence. And, you know, both sides will tell you the other one started it, and it just kind of goes on and on. So, a raid will kill some militants and also some innocent 70-year-old bystander. And then in retaliation, they'll kill some Israelis, either in Israel or settlers or whatever. And then settlers will go on a pogrom and kill. And so, but it's really reaching alarming levels. Okay, so you got Bibi's domestic situation in Israel proper is a mess because in opposition to this initiative to constrain the judiciary, they're having these massive demonstrations, as you've probably seen on TV, like 100,000 people in the streets. So he faces that. The West Bank is we may well be heading into a third intifada that's very violent, unlike the first one, and probably violent in a different way than the second one, is my guess. But anyway, yeah.
I'm
getting to Iran, by the way, but go ahead.
Okay, 2 things. First, Ehud Barak gave a speech. If I remember how it was described, this may be in this Walter Russell Mead article, which says that we're quite close to having a war in the Middle East. But Barak said, well, the Knesset is going to pass this law, the judiciary is going to overrule it, and then it's just a question of which of the who is backed by the armed forces and the police and the other 4 big powers in government. So it's like the law of the jungle there. It's like, who backs the coup? Do the armed forces back the judiciary, or do they back Bibi? That's really weird.
Well, there's no constitution. It's like England; they don't have a constitution, and that's part of the issue. And the judiciary apparently, at some point, the Supreme Court did a kind of a Marbury versus Madison type thing where they ruled in a way that elevated their stature.
Right.
And so you're right. In the absence of a constitution, it could get ugly. I thought the conventional wisdom was that if it apparently gets back to there's something called the parliament can pass something called a basic law, and there was a basic law that affirmed the importance of human rights and stuff or something. And I think this Marbury Madison verse type thing involved the Supreme Court saying that basic law was in some respects tantamount to a constitution. But I think there are people that are saying that, like, look, if the parliament passed the basic law, the parliament can do, the Knesset can unpass it or something. I don't know. I've definitely exceeded my expertise, but it's messy.
The second thing, which is your transition to Iran, is that Mead says that Israel's always Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon, and what might trigger an Israeli strike is the Russians giving them more defenses against an air raid. So if Russia starts to give them more defenses, the Israelis may say, we better do the raid now before they install these defenses when we can get in and do our job. The Russians don't have to give them anything very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And that might provoke, an Israeli strike.
I'm curious whether Walter Russell Mead, like 2 years ago, was making the comparable argument about us arming Ukraine and doing more and more coordinated NATO exercises with the Ukrainian army, and suggesting that maybe this would have the unfortunate effect of pushing Putin into a decision to invade. But I digress. It's the same logic. It could happen.
I don't know what he wrote back then, actually.
I doubt it was that. One other thing about about the judiciary issue in Israel. Remember, because it's a parliamentary system, it's not like they really now have 3 branches of government and one of them would be weakened. In a parliamentary system, the executive branch and the legislative branch are essentially the same. You have to control the legislative branch to be in the executive seat. So it really would be a decisive swing of power. And again, this is an extremist coalition. I mean, look, Bibi himself, I would say, is far right, but he's a relatively liberal guy in the coalition he's assembled. Anyway, the connection I was going to make to Iran was, naturally, I look at Bibi in a situation like this. He's got all these domestic troubles. You're reading that Iran is enriching uranium to higher and higher levels. It's not yet weapons grade. And even if it was, Bill Burns, CIA, says it would still be another couple of years before they'd have the actual bomb on a missile ready to go, whatever. But I thought, of course, wag the dog. This Bibi needs a war right now. And on top of that, the Biden administration, again, which is just shockingly hawkish. I'm increasingly seeing it like they did the unprecedented thing of saying Israel can do whatever they want with Iran and we will have their back. The ambassador to Israel said that. And so we've given them the green light, at least publicly, unless we're telling them something else privately. In any event, no previous administration had gone quite that far publicly. So seems to me the way is paved for a politically opportunistic attack on Iran. Now, that doesn't shock us because Bob is always saying things like that. But what I heard on a podcast 2 days ago is David Sanger saying the same thing. He even says it's likely, he worries, that Bibi, to distract from this domestic stuff, is going to start a war with Iran. So if there's a strike, does it necessarily mean a wide war, or no, it doesn't. I mean, Iran has always been incredibly restrained. Not incredibly, I mean, intelligently restrained, probably, because they know they're outgunned ultimately. But they've always, and this gets back to the idea that Iran is this crazy destabilizing state. They've always been very calculated in the way they handle these things. I mean, if you remember the way they responded to Trump's assassination of Soleimani, it was like they said, well, we got to do something. We don't want to force Trump into a war. I mean, I wasn't privy to the conversations, but then they launched these ballistic missiles that completely wiped out the barracks of American soldiers in Iraq, but alerted the Americans via the Iraqis so they could evacuate the barracks. I mean, it's not totally risk averse, but it's a pretty smart way to handle a situation without starting a war.
I thought that just bought them time while they worked on something more decisive. But
this was years ago. I guess yeah.
It seems to me there was something that was supposed to be a revenge for Soleimani that happened, but I forget what it was.
Well, I'll tell you what scares me. This is a total rumor. I don't know where it came from. Is somebody saying that Iran, this is complete hearsay. I don't even know what the ultimate source is, but that Iran, that the retaliation would be against, diaspora Jews. Now, decades ago, a synagogue in Argentina, I guess, was blown up by Hezbollah. It's common in American discourse to say Iran did that. Actually, Hezbollah did it in pretty clear retaliation for Israel assassinating a Hezbollah guy. And we don't know whether Hezbollah cleared it with Iran or what. But anyway, that's a horrible thing. Apparently, Iran doesn't have the kind of assets inside Israel that can retaliate there, which Israel has inside of Iran, and is for that, and kills people with. So that's what that would be, in a way, the worst of all outcomes. It would not be a good cycle that started, but
I agree. So anyway, that's Iran.
So anyway, when David Sanger and I agree, you can say that all across the ideological spectrum, people are saying this thing.
Okay. I have two more topics on my scorecard, unless you want to fill us in on what's happening in Ukraine.
I do at some point, but go ahead, your turn.
My Twitter feed is my impressions are asymptotically approaching zero. So I now no longer attack people, because when I attack people, the only people that read it will be the people I attack. What's the point of that? So nobody's reading my tweets. My tweets are very useful as notes to myself, what I'm thinking at any given moment, and then maybe I can go through them later and do something productive with them, like put them on my Substack. But I don't think I'm the only person on Twitter who feels like deflated, because they seem to be much diminished. And maybe that's all there was. Maybe all my readers were porn bots. I sort of like them, but they seem to be gone.
The porn bots have deserted you?
Even the porn bots have left. So it's depressing. I would have thought Elon would have given me back my porn.
Well, the good news is I think we're on the verge of a wave of AI porn bots, where it won't be pictures of real people, it won't be real people talking, but what's the difference?
And it just struck home to me how AI is going to put the New York Times out of business. I mean, you type in what's happening in Iran, and they will write you three paragraphs of what's happening in Iran for free, and the New York Times charges for it. So they might even incorporate what David Sanger said to somebody at somewhere, and so I guess until Google starts charging for its AI search, and you could see them charging for better and better versions of it, the New York Times is in trouble. No?
That's a good question. This is going to be a completely huge disruptive wave. I mean, this some science fiction periodical had to quit accepting submissions because they were getting so many that were AI generated and tweaked. I mean, it's the latest news is Snapchat is integrating an AI chat thing in their service, and people are saying, well, I hope will not exert a bad influence on our teenagers. Well, we'll see. I mean, I guess we're going to find out. Facebook said they will soon be doing something or other. But wait, so your specific model is just AI generated journalism, basically?
Yeah, AI generates the news, and it does it completely up to date. So it's like, it generates it anew every time you put in a request. So, it'll tell you what happened in Iran up to 10 minutes ago, whereas the Times, always has some kind of lag. It used to have a day lag.
I mean, you already have the Google News aggregator does a pretty good job of that. The aggregation is done algorithmically, even though the stories are generated by humans, apparently. That's already, if you want up to date, the Times is not the place to go for up to date. I mean, a good Twitter feed is better, but
right. And I guess if there's no journalism, then the AI won't have anything to feed off of. But go ahead.
You mean no text to train itself on?
If David Sanger isn't reporting on Iran, how can the AI rip off what David Sanger says and regurgitate it to you? Somebody has to actually find out what's going on in Iran.
Yeah, but actually, there's probably, if you really identify your good sources on Twitter, although a number of them are actually journalists who are making money at their journalism job and can't make a living independently on Twitter. But you know, you could look. My Ukraine war list is just head and shoulders above the New York Times, both in terms of finding out what's actually going on and in terms of finding it out fast.
A classic example was the New York Times had this big story on some tank battle that was won by the Ukrainians. It wasn't clear to me when this tank battle happened. It was just sort of.
Is this within the last couple of weeks?
I don't know. The story was like 2 days ago.
That may have been another Vuhledar thing, but I think
it was.
This is a perfect example. It was Vuhledar. Well, it's a perfect example. Like if you're on Twitter on my list, you would have seen Michael Kaufman say, tank battle is a mischaracterization of what's going on in Vuhledar. What's happening is the Russian tanks come in to a minefield, they hit a mine, they stop, the Ukrainians hit them with shoulder-fired missiles and artillery, and they retreat. It's not a tank battle. This is what I mean. I mean, the regular newspapers just totally suck in their Ukraine coverage, and it's a resource problem. You can't. It's hard to beat the collective intelligence of Twitter. But anyway, so should we talk Ukraine briefly?
Yeah, and I have one issue to bring up
about Ukraine.
Yeah, Michael McFaul said we should threaten Crimea because if Putin feels Crimea is going to go down, he will cut a deal. And the alternative, of course, is that he will escalate. So I don't quite know why McFaul knows the answer to that.
Well, actually, I think that was also asserted. That view was also, I think, attributed to somebody to the administration weeks ago when it was reported that we now were kind of okay with Ukraine doing strikes in Crimea, but not with them like trying to take Crimea, but with them trying to bring Russia to the table. So that meme has been out there. It's okay. Not, in game theory terms, it's not impossible. It's just that it's kind of fraught with peril. I mean, anyway, at the moment, Ukraine's got bigger problems on their hands.
Okay.
First of all, Bakhmut seems to be finally in the process of actually falling, although it may be hard for it to, some Ukraine. Well, where to begin? So it's been getting more and more encircled, and people have been saying for really weeks, like, when are the Ukrainians going to withdraw? There's now one paved road out of there. And once the Russians getting closer and closer to that, well, apparently yesterday the Russians blew up the bridge in Western Ukraine. That is that road. So as of now, I don't think there's a way to get heavy equipment out of Bakhmut, like, armored personnel carriers, tank. I don't know how much stuff is in there, but it's not such a daunting river that guys couldn't get across it and walk home. But they're cutting it pretty close. Meanwhile, Ukraine has blown up bridges on a waterway that runs through the middle of the city. They've apparently retreated from eastern to western Bakhmut. But I think we may see Ukrainian command take some heat, depending on how this plays out. They could wind up getting a lot of guys captured and killed who didn't have to get captured and killed.
Why is Bakhmut so important?
Well, because they both decided to make it important. I mean, it's not nothing, because it is, you go due west from there and you hit the last two big cities that Russia hasn't taken in the Donbass. They've taken all the big cities in Luhansk, in Donetsk. There's these two cities, Kramatorsk and something else. Starts with S. And it's on the way so it's not nothing, but at the same time, the Michael Kaufmans of the world have been saying it's not intrinsically a huge deal. I mean, there is a line of defense that goes through there. It's just that there's another line of defense before the two cities. So people think you can sustain losing it, but it's not nothing. Anyway, it became a big deal because it became a big deal, and they were both throwing huge human resources into it.
Why is Gettysburg so important? Well, not because of its strategic significance, but because I mean, both sides say they're exhausting the other. You know, I had said weeks ago, it seems kind of crazy to be trading actual Ukrainian soldiers for Russian convicted felons who just came out of Princeton, out of prison to be thrown, you know, to be cannon fodder. But I did think today, maybe if there's a sense in which it's smart for Ukraine to expend a lot of resources killing those guys, it is because there's probably a lot of prisoners in Russia, and you would like word to get back to the prisons that, hey, you know, all those guys who went off to fight, they're all dead now. Okay. Right.
So don't make that choice. And I've heard that word is getting back to prison. So there's that. Meanwhile, if you look, you know, somebody published a map along the whole battle line where land has changed hands over the last 2 months, January, February. And it's virtually all in favor of Russia. It's like 95%. It isn't a huge quantity of land, but the point is Ukraine is completely playing defense. A couple of little parcels of land Ukraine has gained in the south, but they're completely playing defense. I guess there's reason to hope that the Russian military will exhaust itself. Michael Kaufman, I think so, and he was right about the same thing this summer when he said the Russians can't keep this up forever. So maybe they will run out of steam. The Ukrainian plan is they gather these new arms that are coming in, especially in the way of armored vehicles, and launch this big offensive in the south after the muddy season, which apparently is already upon us in some parts of Ukraine. And so we'll see. The last thing is there's been some crazy stuff going on in Russia. I mean, Ukraine, they did a bunch of drone attacks that seem to have almost entirely failed. I don't know if they were from Ukraine or from within Russia, but like 5 attacks. And then yesterday, these guys crossed the border from Ukraine who call themselves, it's kind of like the Ahmad Chalabis of this war. It's like, these are the guys of Russian, I guess they're Russians, but in Ukraine, and they style themselves as like the government in exile, or the guys who are going to start the revolution or something. So they crossed the border, and according to the Russians, killed a couple of civilians. I did see video of a shot up seemingly civilian car with a body in it.
Well, they think they're going to start the new government of Russia or of Ukraine?
No, Russia. They're going to start the revolution in Russia. I mean, it seems to be this completely deluded guy.
Right.
One question is, did this have the sanction of the Ukrainian armed forces? He seems to have had some past connection with the armed forces. But anyway, this is, I mean, even the people who aren't like me and are always on the lookout for things we do that will play into Putin's hands propaganda-wise, are saying, this plays into Putin's hands propaganda-wise. Like, it's like, this is exactly what he wants. It's like, yes, the homeland is under threat, you know, from this little bullshit pinprick that accomplished nothing. Right. And so I guess that's all. I don't know. Okay.
Well, thank you.
And as it happens, our alarm is going off, Mickey.
Okay. Well,
but if you have more to say.
I don't have more to say about Ukraine. I just said I wanted to draw attention to this article by Tom Nichols, who argues Americans need to think very hard about what happens if Russia wins, especially with an assist from the Chinese. They will be living in a North American redoubt. The freedom of movement Americans take for granted of goods, people, money, and even ideas would shrink. It just seems to me that's a little exaggerated. I mean, even at the height of Cold War, we could fly to Paris. Is he saying you're not going to be able to fly to Paris now because if Russia wins in Ukraine. I mean, Russia used to own Ukraine. I mean, give me a break.
You know, Mickey, in the past, in my newsletter, the Nonzero newsletter, I've sometimes been hard on Tom Nichols, and I just like to take this opportunity to say I don't regret it. It's like, what is he even talking about? I mean, first of all, yeah, we may be moving into a Cold War when there is a lot more where you can't go to China, can't do much business with China, but we seem to be leading the way to that world. I mean, if anybody is launching a kind of techno-economic war right now, it's us. And if he didn't like it, he should talk to Joe Biden. It's not going to be the Russians who do it. That just seems like crazy talk. I don't even know what he has in mind. And
I don't know either. I mean, I guess he's saying American businessmen won't be able to go do business in Eastern Europe or something. I don't know. That's
crazy too. I mean,
yeah.
Maybe he thinks Russia will somehow magically go beyond Ukraine and take all of Eastern Europe, which it has no plans to do and couldn't do if it wanted.
One thing that happened, I don't know what the significance is, that Serbia and Kosovo agreed to the EU's terms to normalize relations, which I assume is a very good sign in terms of avoiding a war in Kosovo. But maybe I'm
wrong. Serbia and Kosovo both?
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught the headline but didn't ponder it. That won't make Russia happy if Serbia does it. I will tell you that.
Huh.
Why not? What?
Why not?
Well, that's their Slavic brothers. I mean, and there has and I would question whether that. Well, I don't know. I don't know how much popular support that would have. There is a lot of sympathy, I think, for Russia and Serbia. And of course, one of the things that most pissed Russia off was when we bombed Serbia in '99. So I know nothing. I know nothing.
Okay.
So things we could talk about in the Parrot room.
Okay.
I can probably think of a little more about Ukraine. Scott Adams got canceled, like actually canceled.
Yeah, I didn't read. I ignored that controversy. So you could.
I am deeply conversant. This is the Dilbert cartoonist, former Dilbert cartoonist, whose cartoon I assume will soon be found on Substack. Can't be found in the newspapers it used to appear in.
There's a big debate on why kids are so depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Might be worth going into. Matt Iglesias, Ross Douthat, and others have weighed in.
So has Alice from Queens. She has an insight I'll be sharing in the Parrot room.
Okay. There is the case over the student loan forgiveness plan that Biden declared. It's before the Supreme Court. Conservatives would like to say that Biden overstepped his grounds. I'm not sure he did, and there are a couple of interesting things to say about it. Although I'm generally not interested in the student loan forgiveness issue. They're making AI out of human brain cells. Now, you're not going to tell me that doesn't achieve consciousness, and they have artificial intelligence that's actually made with the same brain cells that we have.
That may be the item that we were thinking about putting in today's Nonzero newsletter, and I vetoed on grounds that it seemed like bullshit. But it may not be. You can draw my attention to what you're talking
about. There's a question of should we all buy books because all the online books are going to be adulterated by PC sensitivity editors. I have. Anyway, I want to talk about. I want to recommend this movie, American Factory, that I've already recommended. And I finally saw the end of Goodbye, The Long Goodbye. So there you go.
Oh, we can discuss that. Well, that's excellent.
And I dare you to name the Republican candidate who Mark Halpern is pushing.
I have no idea. Is it
the name in the paragraph?
Is it a particular region that I should be thinking about if I'm going to guess the answer to that?
Well, if I gave you the region, you would guess the answer. Yes.
Well, I want to guess the answer. Yeah. So I want the region.
It's somebody who Roald Dahl would describe as, under the new sensitivity rules, as large.
Someone who he
Yeah, under the old sensitivity rules, a
Chris
non-sensitivity,
Chris
he
Christie.
would. I'm not saying your bunny has a good nose, but I'm not saying.
Okay. Also, by the way, oh well, Energy Department now thinks lab leak, and we can talk about that. That lab more likely than any other. It's the more likely bet for COVID origins. Yeah, we can talk a little more about AI. I want to complain a little more about Elon Musk. And I think I guess the CIA said, yeah.
I learned the real story behind what was supposedly the real story behind Elon Musk's tweets suddenly appearing on everybody's feed.
And you're going to share that with us.
I will share that with you.
And dispel misconceptions that have been spread by people like me. Good. I welcome that. And I guess that's about it. So, patreon.com/parrot room. We will see people there shortly.
Okay, see you there.